My name is Drew Clark, and I am the editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast. And I'm going to be joined today by three very knowledgeable guests in the broadband industry who will be able to speak to some of the issues that networks are facing in terms of new traffic patterns, new traffic usages in terms of the last week, too, as we're in the middle of this coronavirus pandemic. This is the week anniversary of our launching this series. We kicked it off last Friday, first as a weekly series, but decided this week that we really needed to have interaction more frequently, just for members of our community to talk about the ways broadband can be a solution to the issues of the coronavirus pandemic. And in honor of the 1 week anniversary, I have a very scarce commodity here, toilet paper. Just given how scarce and how strange the world we're living in is, who could imagine a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago that we would all be trying to work at home, all be going to school at home, and changing our social interaction. So with that, let's go ahead and turn to our panel. First, we'll be hearing from Tyler Cooper. Tyler is the editor-in-chief of Broadband Now, a website that provides information about broadband speeds and availability. Following Tyler, we're going to hear from Roger Timmerman. Roger is the CEO of Utopia Fiber, which is the largest open access fiber network in the United States. And Utopia Fiber is a partner and sponsor of Broadband Breakfast. And so we're very grateful for that and grateful for the great work that Roger and his team have done in Utah, where I happen to live, although I must confess I don't live in an area where I can get connectivity. So if there's spottiness on our stream today, you cannot blame Roger or Utopia Fiber. And then we will hear from Dane Jasper, who's the CEO of Sonic. You go by Sonic Fiber or Sonic Gigabit Fiber, or what's the official name, Dane?
Well, we used to be Sonic.net. We just go by Sonic now.
All right. One more time. I didn't hear. Maybe others.
All right. Yeah. Check my headset. Drew, can you hear me now?
I can now. Yes, thank you.
All right. We just go by, it used to be, long ago it was Sonoma Interconnect, which became Sonic, and we were Sonic.net. We became .com, and so now it's just Sonic.
Well, one of our webcasts this week was on teleworking, and one of the guests on the panel said one of the things we all have to do is we have to lower our standards a little bit, right? And so we just have to be a little creative. The connectivity it has worked out pretty good, but we're gonna plan for the best and hope for the worst. Well, anyway, with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Tyler. Tell us a little bit about the reporting that you've done and published this week in regards to some of the traffic issues you've seen online. Go ahead, Tyler.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, so across the country, obviously, there's been a lot of discussion about how home internet connections are holding up amid this sort of mass shift that we're seeing, not only from remote work, but also, obviously, colleges are closed, K-12 schools are closed. And so what we wanted to do is take a look at sort of the data from a national perspective, which is what we usually do at Broadband Now Research. And we just wanted to see what's happening, from the last week, so the week of March 9th, compared to the 10 weeks prior. And the good news is, what we found is that, perhaps unsurprisingly to some of my fellow panelists, most U.S. cities are holding up. At least, most providers' networks are holding up. At least that's what the data shows. We found that 6 of the top 10 U.S. cities by population have seen really little to no change in median download speed test results over the past 11 weeks leading up to March 9th. 4 cities have seen some degradations. That includes Houston, New York City, San Diego, and San Jose. And you can see the numbers and how it all plays out on our website. But it's important to note that there's a lot of factors here that could influence what we're seeing. Obviously we have a mass shift of people kind of logging in from a work VPN, for one, that's one possibility. That's that could just slow things down by the nature of them just logging in via proxy. But it's also important to note that the cities we experienced degradations in actually started out with just net higher speed tests than those that sort of held within range. So, I mean, even though we're talking about degradations, we're still talking about speeds that can certainly accommodate most telecommuting functions.
Mm-hmm. So, just to clarify a little bit and maybe repeat a second time, do you have any reason why certain cities, the four you just mentioned, are experiencing abnormal performance, whereas the others aren't? Do you have any kind of reason to analyze that, some cities versus other cities?
Yeah, no, it's difficult to say at the city level, obviously. I mean, one thing we're trying to do, so right now we're looking at the top 10 cities by population, but we're trying to expand this, and our goal is to expand this over the next couple of weeks to every state, and hopefully, hundreds of cities potentially. But at the moment, like I said, it's difficult to say whether there's one thing sort of happening, say in Houston, that's causing this. It certainly appears that in the cities where the connection was a little slower to start in terms of the median speed test, we just haven't seen as much movement. Versus somewhere like Houston, where it might have started out at 80 MIPS as a median download speed, has dipped a little bit to say 50 or so. So yeah, it's very difficult to say there's one specific thing driving that. I mean, obviously we're seeing peak times being displaced across the board. So there's nothing that jumps out in my mind that would make sense, to point to one city, having it happen more than another.
Right. What kind of data do you normally collect, sort of as you routinely do, and are you going to kind of repeat this every week, Tyler? What can we expect from following and tracking? And for that matter, if I may, have you worked with or relied upon other services that do measurement, such as Ookla's Speed Test, Measurement Lab, and others? Do you have any ways to get data from other sources besides your own services? Yes.
So this data from this report actually relies on Measurement Lab's raw data. So Measurement Labs puts out data on a two-day lag, and so we're basically just processing that raw data for this for the most part. So, and to answer your other question, this is a very dynamic situation, obviously, but our current plan is to try to keep updating this and monitoring this weekly. So next week we're hoping to expand it out. This week we just wanted to get a good understanding of how the top 10 cities by population are faring, because that's obviously a question on a lot of people's minds, and we're really hoping to expand that out, like I said, hopefully to hundreds of cities as soon as next week.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Tyler, for that introduction to the topic. Let's turn to Roger to tell us a little bit about Utopia Fiber, about your network, and what observations you've had about its performance over the past week or two.
Yeah, so thanks, Drew. So Utopia Fiber, we build these fiber networks. It's an open access system, so we're not providing the services, but we have partnerships with all these different providers who use our fiber. We have cities that we've built out fiber to the home in 14 cities, but we have fiber in about 50 cities for different businesses or schools, things like that. So we've got a lot of different data points to look at. So I spent some time this morning just looking at interfaces all over the place to seeing what's going on. And it's interesting because we can look at, here's what a rural city looks like, here's what a more urban city looks like, here's a service provider that focuses on residential may look like, versus here's a business provider, or here's the school system, or here's the a mobile backhaul connection. And so there's a lot of different data points we've been looking at. So I'll share some of those. It's kind of fun. Typically from a business perspective, you'd see things peak or come up in the morning as people get to work, and then it stays pretty flat during the day. You don't really see that jump a lot, and then drops off about 5 p.m. So as we look at our business providers, we just see a consistent graph that looks like that. And that's decreased over the last week. As people are staying from home, there has been a noticeable decrease there. Now we go look at the residential side of things, and they started about the same time, and it stays flat for most of the day until late afternoon, and people get home. Then we see that jump way up and it kind of spikes. It's probably at the top from about 8 p.m. till about 11 p.m. And so as long as we see that graph, it's kind of a healthy curve that we expect for residential. And we've seen that take a little bit bigger during the day. It's gone up. I think it's just, you have people, it makes sense with what's going on. People are working more and using it more during the day. And then that peak at night, we're not seeing a huge difference. We see maybe 10%. I mean, that's significant when you talk how many customers and cities and networks we have. But it's probably peaking a little bit close to 10 to 15% higher than it was maybe a month ago. But we're also adding about 600 or 700 customers every month. So we have to say, well, it's supposed to go just by our customer growth. But that's about 2%, 2 to 3% a month based on that number. And so seeing a 10 to 15% jump, definitely there's an impact. People are doing more at home. They're not going out to movies or streaming movies or not going out as much. So that's kind of a cool thing to see. On the mobile backhaul, we're seeing less. That's gone down. I think maybe because people are at home and they're on their Wi-Fi, they're not, burdening the cellular network. So the cell network traffic is down pretty significantly. School traffic is down. So obviously people aren't at school. They're not using the computer labs. I think you probably have, just the basic stuff, lifeline systems at a school, but not the usage that we'd expect. So those are the main data points I could pick out from the different things. There's really no difference between our rural areas and urban areas that was noticeable. And that's about all I could really pull from the different data. I don't know if you have any questions about any of that.
Well, let me ask a question about the upload speeds. This is, of course, a major problem with many types of broadband networks. It's not an issue for your network, Roger, and I suspect the same for Dane's, and he can clarify if not. But with gigabit symmetrical networks, you have the same capacity up as you do down. And one can have a very fast download speed and still have a very low upload speed. And my understanding, and technologists on this call can correct me a little more, is that's an impediment to doing a lot of the types of things that people are now expecting to do in their home environments that maybe are more traditionally business environments of the upstreaming, webcasting such as this, and other types of activities. So could you talk a little bit about that, Roger, the advantages of a symmetrical fiber network?
Yeah, it's a little different, I think, with, we have kids doing this remote education stuff, and they're just kind of getting started with it. And I know for my kids, a lot of it is still just consuming content. They're not doing a lot of interactive classroom. I know they've been teaching the teachers how to do that. Some of the days they've taken off were just training days for teachers, because they do want to be able to hold a classroom environment where students can raise their hand, that they'd have video feeds and interaction with those students. And so we haven't quite transitioned, at least in our school district, to full online classroom, interactive classroom. In that situation, obviously each student would want an upload. They'd be sharing their video with the teacher so they can tell if they're there. And I've got 4 kids. We have pretty big families generally in Utah. But if you can imagine 4 or 5 kids or so all streaming at the same time, plus, the parents maybe doing their remote work and other things, that upload we're not talking just one person uploading video. We're talking, a household of people who need that upload capacity. It needs to be reliable. And as, these cameras have gotten pretty good, and that we expect pretty good quality these days. These are high def type streams. And so that there's definitely a need for that symmetrical connection, more so than we've ever had a use for in the past.
No, these are excellent points, and I'm kind of musing to myself. The quality that I'm experiencing, I don't know about the rest of you, is markedly poorer today than in previous webcasts. And it just occurred to me, Roger, as you were saying this about multiple people streaming, I just came in from where my daughter, who's a pre-K, is having an online speech therapy lesson, and so she is webcasting at this very moment. So now it kind of becomes a little clearer. Hey, my upstream is bottlenecked because there's multiple live streams going on. And so again, I think that while we may be in the early stages, at least some of us are experiencing that right now, where educational uses, including video, are happening in multiple computers on the 5 kids at my household and their activities right now. So I appreciate that point, and I expect there to be a lot more discussion about the way limited upstream speeds can be a bottleneck, not just to streaming, but to many applications. Any other thoughts on that, Roger, before we turn it over to Dane?
Yeah, I would just completely agree, and yeah, that makes sense that yours would be struggling if someone else in the house is uploading. We've got pretty good video here and pretty good video here at these boxes, but yours, you got to point the right way here. Yours is not so good. Directions here. So I would guess that you don't have a great upload where you're at, but the others do, or maybe you just don't have other people in the house hogging that bandwidth from you. But yeah, that's definitely an important aspect of broadband that I think often gets overlooked, is the benefits of symmetrical connectivity. And here we are doing this video conferencing and saying, hey, here's this new example. But even as you look at the consumer electronics that are out there, I went to CES in January, and just seeing the products that are out there, you can go get these Netgear Arlos that are one of the top rated cameras, and they'll record your video 24/7 to the cloud. And you imagine putting a bunch of these 2K or even 4K resolution cameras that are constantly uploading, and what that would do to your video conferencing abilities. Unless of course you upgrade to Utopia Fiber, it won't be a concern.
Right.
So we're coming to your neighborhood, Drew.
We want it. We want it now.
We're building.
Dane, tell us a little bit about Sonic and your experience, both as a provider and repeat for me, because I didn't hear Sonic Fiber or Sonic Gigabit Fiber or just Sonic. And secondly, if you could talk about the study that you released, or the kind of the information you released earlier this week about your own traffic.
Is a internet access provider based in California. We continue to have customers on legacy technologies like DSL, but the majority of our directly connected customers are now on our own fiber optic network, connected at gigabit symmetric speeds. And so we released a sort of 2-week analysis that showed the usage on our network before the communities that we serve moved to a shelter-in-place order. And then as there was that shift to homeschooling and work, what the impacts of that were on and we highlighted in this, daytime and evening time peak changes. And I'll say, a lot of folks have inquired, will the internet access networks be adequate for work from home and distance learning? And, and I'll talk in a moment about the upstream side, which remains a concern, but on the downstream side, on the download side, the daytime, for those of us who serve primarily residential consumers, the daytime has been slack time. There's a lot of idle capacity. And so what we saw and published in that chart was there is an increase in daytime utilization that is substantial. However, even with that increase, the daytime utilization remains well below what the evening time, peak hour entertainment usage was prior to, today the entire state of California is in a shelter-in-place order. But the other thing we've seen is that the evening time has gone way up. So our evening peak leaped over the span of less than a week by 25%. And so the issue with the networks, at least for those of us serving residential, on the downstream side at least, is not the impacts of work from home and distance learning. It's the impacts of social distancing. And when everyone stops going out to restaurants and going out to bars with friends and swiping whichever direction on Tinder and going out on dates. And instead, they're all sitting at home, watching 4K Netflix and the latest on Disney Plus, or gaming, or using Stadia, which is a huge bandwidth consumer. The evening time peak hour, which for us runs roughly between 9 and 10 p.m. Pacific, that has gone up a lot. And for our network, because it's a fiber to the home network, we haven't seen any congestion in the network. However, there were upgrades that we had planned for 6 months from now and a year from now that we're accelerating, and we've completed some of those. We'll complete more in the next week. On the upstream, and you were talking to Roger a little bit about the asymmetric services and upstream bandwidth. It used to be that our upstream peak was about the same as the evening time entertainment downstream peak. That's shifted. We're now seeing the peak utilization or peak hour for outbound is happening during the day. And that is this big shift to video conferencing and distance learning and all the meetings that we're having via these sorts of tools. And so our upstream has increased, our upstream utilization has also increased by about 25%. The peak is happening at a different time now, which is interesting and speaks to the applications. But again, for us with a symmetric network, for the vast majority of our customers, we're not seeing congestion or an impact. I am curious, and it'd be interesting to hear from Tyler and the data that Measurement Labs is gathering. How do the different kinds of network topologies behave under the new loads that we're seeing? And I think in areas like those served by Utopia and Sonic, the networks that we've built are well suited for this kind of elastic load. But if you are in a rural market with inadequate backhaul, or maybe on a wireless ISP where there's not enough spectrum, or there's too many customers on a sector, it was fine last week, but it might not be fine next week. So rural markets and those kind of hard to serve consumers, there's also areas where some incumbent carriers continue to run 20-year-old ADSL1. They had 3 megabit internet, and it was barely okay for one Netflix stream. And now they're bringing 3 or 4 kids home and trying to all do things during the day. So the rural markets are one concern and would be interesting to look at. And then the other is the different kinds of network topology. So, consumers in America are generally served on one of 3 technologies: asymmetric DSL. That is a dedicated connection. So your neighbors can't slow you down until the uplink from the city, the backhaul. So if there's congestion, it should be something the carrier should be able to remedy. The issue with DSL is the upstream might be really too slow for the kinds of applications we're trying to deliver today. The second category is cable, and the majority of American households are served with a hybrid fiber coax cable system. And the 2 challenges there are, first, it's asymmetric. So the upstream is limited, and that can bring those same issues that could affect DSL users. But the second is it is shared. So unlike DSL, where you might have a dedicated, albeit slower, but consistent pipe all to yourself, with cable, you're sharing an amount of bandwidth with a whole neighborhood. And the size of that neighborhood, how many homes are served by that node, and how much spectrum is allocated, and how much bandwidth, how many channels are bonded, and how much bandwidth can be delivered, will vary by cable carrier, by market, and even neighborhood to neighborhood. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how that technology compares on a very granular basis. And then fiber to the premise, obviously the newest network, the most modern deployment, and the least capacity constraints or challenges. And so, as we look, Tyler, you were mentioning Measurement Labs and their data on a per city basis. I think it'd be interesting to look at performance on a per carrier basis and per technology basis. And, for example, there's performance information that's published for Verizon Fios versus Verizon DSL. They've segregated the IPs that are allocated to each, and they're ranked on the performance of those by ranking services. And so I think it'll be very interesting to see geographically, by technology, and by carrier and the technologies each of the carrier uses, how much impact we see.
Thank you. That was excellent. We actually have a question here that I think applies, and maybe we start with Tyler. How do you think this will affect rural areas that already have connectivity and pipeline speed issues as more students and workplaces go mobile in nature? So that's from Justin Martin through our YouTube stream. Thank you, Justin, for your question. So let's actually kind of pass that to Tyler to talk a little bit about the rural question, as well as your observations on what Roger and Dane have addressed, the band of information we got.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dane just mentioned a lot of the things that sort of address this question. I mean, rural areas are sort of in this strange situation now, because in the best of times, a lot of rural connections can be strenuous, depending on the time of day, depending on the technology. And at this moment, if we have, I mean, obviously one could imagine that the bulk of this sort of shift to stay-at-home life is happening in major cities, but that's likely to change more and more over the next coming weeks. So it's just a matter of how these networks hold up that have really never dealt with something like this, especially when you're dealing with, as Dane just mentioned, technologies that are 20 years old in many cases, technologies that have never been tested to this sort of magnitude. And then of course you just have the issue in rural areas where there's just plenty of folks that don't even have a connection right now. And in that situation, it's like there's a whole new logistical set of challenges. You have people in university and in K through 12 schools who are coming home and they just have no way to participate. They're being told they need to switch to online classes, and either they don't have a connection at all or they don't have one that supports it. And so this is a really, really valid question and a really difficult one to answer at the national level, because it's just, I think we don't yet know the full extent of how rural areas will be affected, especially those that already have issues. And I don't think that we've personally really seen the peak of this just yet. I think that there's potential for, more businesses to close, more schools to close. I think I saw this morning that there's like 95,000 schools closed in the US currently. And I don't imagine that number will go down, at least in the next 2 weeks. So yeah, that's a really, really excellent point. And yeah, I mean, as Dane was saying, and I see another question. Oh, Christopher.
Yeah, it's for you. So yeah, Christopher Ali of University of Virginia says, do you have any idea how America's broadband networks are holding up compared to other countries who might have this data?
Yeah, Christopher's
Go, Tyler. Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Christopher. Good to hear from you. We have not looked specifically at how America's holding up compared to other countries. There's a few challenges involved in doing that, but it is something that's very, very interesting. I'm sure most of us here have seen the news that Netflix is planning to sort of purposefully degrade their streaming signal in the UK, which was interesting to see. I don't know personally, and maybe some of my other panelists can chime in here. They might be more experienced than me. But this could point to some backhaul issues in the UK. This could point to a few different things. I mean, I'm not familiar enough with the topology of the networks. But it is certainly interesting to imagine that since this is a global issue, this is something that every country is having to deal with in their own way relative to their infrastructure and their population density, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I think as we continue to expand our reporting, and I certainly think, to Dane's point, we want to start looking more specifically at, breaking down by provider type, by carrier, by technology type. Those questions are really, really interesting. And when looking at MLab's data just in bulk, we don't get that sort of split. But there are ways to do that, and we are actively looking at that, as well as how to break down potentially comparisons against other countries.
Let's ask Roger and Dane. You both, I certainly know, Roger, you serve rural areas, and I assume you do as well, Dane. Could you just speak about whether you've been able to look at data between your urban core and rural core? Or again, is this still just too premature for the way different subsegments of your footprints are reacting? I'm sorry, I had you on mute. I apologize. Here we go.
No
Go ahead, Roger.
So yeah, we do have rural areas that we serve. Where it's on fiber, it doesn't really matter whether it's urban or rural. You know, they get the same speeds. In fact, we just had another sign up in Morgan City for a 10 gig customer, 10 gig residential service. And we don't have any issues delivering on that because we have fiber, all the way back into the core of our network. And so we essentially have infinite capacity to get out to that rural community. The problem is there's many communities that don't have that. And so, where that rural city lies may be along some existing long haul fiber routes or maybe not. And those that are without are at a huge disadvantage compared to those that have some sort of fiber option, to those communities that those local ISPs can use. And from my perspective, I'd really love to see this treated almost like we deal with roads. Each city is usually responsible for the roads in their city, but that city that's way off on its own isn't disconnected from the world. There's county roads and there's state roads that are taken care of by a different tier of government that kind of equalizes the burden on the local cities, right? So a more rural city would benefit more from state roads and county roads than, say, a city that's just tied right into a metropolitan area. And so from a broadband perspective, I'd really like to see a more active role from the counties and the state to equalize or, to level the playing field for these rural communities. I don't necessarily want to see them coming in and, building a state network necessarily, but where there's an obstacle to getting to that rural community, if there's opportunities for grants and public-private partnerships to remove that obstacle so that those other providers can be successful in those rural communities, I think they should take a very active role in that, because those rural, many rural communities are at an enormous disadvantage. And this event that we have is absolutely putting a burden and a problem in those rural communities where they don't have sufficient backhaul. Like I said, on our networks, we've gotten past that. We only do fiber into those communities, but we do have to put in that burden and deal with that when we have a community come to us in a rural area and we say, we just don't have a good way to get to you. There's no fiber. And in order to get there and resolve this for you, we have this enormous burden that we may not necessarily have for a city that looks just like that city. It just happens to have had a fiber route installed either by the state, the county, some private providers, or someone in where there's fiber available. So leveling the playing field a little bit for different communities at a rural level, I think, is an important role of government to step in and help with.
Well, in a moment, perhaps we can come back to the great progress Utopia's made in Morgan, Utah, which is kind of very much off the urban core, and how you were able to do that. But let's get Dane's perspective on the rural versus urban on Sonic's network.
Yeah, prior to this, COVID-19 driven behavioral shift, what we've always seen in our networks is that on a sort of per connected customer basis, rural customers use less bandwidth than urban customers. And, that seems to be technology adoption and lifestyle and the kinds of businesses and employment that exist in rural communities versus urban ones. And so as California has rolled the shelter-in-place order across, what was initially, 6 Bay Area counties, then expanded to 8, now is statewide. What we're seeing is that, all the businesses in the urban areas immediately closed and consumption went up substantially. In rural areas, we're not seeing as much impact, and it's anecdotal, but I suspect that there's less compliance with the shelter in place. If you live in an ultra rural community and there's no sense of panic, you haven't heard about anybody who's infected, the hospitals aren't popping up tents like crazy, you're probably still going, out and having coffee with friends in the morning. You're going for a hike, and
hikes are okay as long as you're by yourself.
Hikes are okay, but
or with your family.
Yeah. So in the rural markets that we serve, we're seeing less bandwidth consumption increase than in the urban markets, and that may be that they're later. The shelter in place just went into place yesterday at midnight for these rural schools were beginning to close. We would have expected to have seen more impact, but there is Roger was talking a bit about the digital divide around availability. Is there good broadband in a rural market? And then there's also adoption. Are people purchasing it? Can they afford it? And do they know how to integrate it into their lives? And both of those remain a challenge. And I think, Roger's point is well made. Urban markets where, suburban markets where fiber is being deployed, you have this modern infrastructure that is now being tested and is standing up really well. And fiber is this sort of future-proof technology. And, Roger says, we've got a 10 gigabit order. We're happy to deliver on that. And, the ability to do that, fiber has virtually infinite capacity. You just need to add faster transmitting and receiving devices on the ends. And that is in substantial contrast to these old copper networks that were designed originally to deliver telephone service and then cable TV service, and that have been enhanced through the addition of broadband technologies. But in the long term, our communities and our society will not be well served until we can, in some way or another, bring a new fiber optic infrastructure network to every community, every business, every school and anchor institution, and every residence. And only then do we really escape the potential for these sort of bandwidth concerns.
And so speaking to that, I know it's kind of a little going forward beyond our panic mode, but how do you see fiber getting built out in more places, Dane? What's the model you've used or you see happening best, whether in your markets or in other markets in the country?
Yeah, Utopia is one model and Sonic is another. Sonic is a commercial service provider. We're building networks speculatively on our own investment. Utopia is a utility model that is fully open access, and it's a completely different approach. And I don't think that the commercial model of just let the service providers build it where they can justify building it is going to successfully reach every premise. Many locations cost a lot to serve, and we need to find ways to catalyze or subsidize or encourage that deployment. And so we, from Sonic's perspective, many carriers oppose community broadband networks. We don't, because fundamentally, if there is a failure of the competitive marketplace and a community wants to put its own money into building a network, more power to them. I certainly would encourage them to have that be an open access network. Moreover, a dark fiber open access network, allowing multiple service providers to differentiate products at a optical level. And we'd certainly love to see more of that. But there is not one size fits all. Every community has its own challenges. Geographic, infrastructure, is it poles, is it underground, is the soil soft, is it rocky, what are the economics of the community, what are the upstream connections, is backhaul available, is there fiber nearby, or do they need 40 miles of hard road built to get there? And so there's no one answer, but at the end of the day, we need to eventually solve this problem. Every premise, home and business, needs fiber connected.
Roger, build on that and talk a little bit about Morgan and the way that you were able to get backhaul to Morgan.
Yeah, so Morgan was a good opportunity for us to partner with them, because compared to another city, we may have gone in and said, hey, we may have millions of dollars worth of fiber costs just to get to your city. However, in the case of Morgan, there was a project done many years ago when they were rebuilding the freeway where conduit and fiber was placed by the Utah Department of Transportation. So we were able to come up, we don't get things from them for free. So we had to trade with them, and we build a lot in their behalf in other areas. But the ability to trade with them for fiber strands in their system to get to the city was a huge benefit. And so that's really what enabled that. I'd say it's because of the state's effort in putting in conduit and fiber that allowed us to do that with Morgan City in a way where now the incremental cost to build out that city and fund the whole thing from the subscriber revenues, no cost to the city, it's working very well there. But had we had to put in $5 million into the project to build that interconnect route, it would have been a really high bar, would have required some subsidy. In a way, you could look at what the state did as a form of a subsidy, but that wasn't even there for the city's purposes. They put it for their own purposes, for putting up traffic cameras and sensors and things like that, like they typically do in their projects. And so it was just kind of a good convenience to us. We would love to see them do more of that, and we'd love to do more of what we do. And without those types of partnerships out there, I don't know how do we get to these rural communities. For them to just do it on their own as an island out in a rural area, that doesn't make sense. They've got to have connectivity back to where the carrier hotels are and the service providers and the other side of the connection. An island network doesn't do you any good because the backhaul will kill you.
Roger, I think you make a really good point about public-private partnerships. And I think, many municipalities have long had the position that, they didn't really worry about telecommunications. Carriers did what carriers wanted to do, and they kind of got what they got, whether they liked it or not. And I think that communities that want to encourage fiber deployment and competitive choice need to think very hard about specific policy decisions that encourage those sorts of things. So, square one, that might be a dig once policy. If you are, if a developer is building a subdivision, the city should make sure that conduit goes in for more than just the incumbents. If the city is engaging in a capital project, they're widening a road or they're upgrading a sewer system or water system, they should include conduit. So there should be a dig once policy. There should also be some infrastructure sharing or cooperation policy. Where conduit exists or where fiber exists, how can that be bought, sold, traded, or exchanged in a way that is a win-win for the service providers who seek to deploy and bring competitive choices and new technologies, and for the community to achieve more deployment. And so infrastructure sharing policies and public-private partnerships are the second tier of that. And then the third is you need good procedures around permitting and managing construction, and the fees, inspections, hidden costs that go along with that. And we've encountered communities where, we have permits in to build network, and then they say, oh, we're going to hire an engineering firm to have an employee sit in a truck and watch every single one of your crews through the entire construction project. And we're going to bill that to you at a markup. And so, they're paying this firm $50 an hour. They're charging us $100 an hour. The city is just taking a markup out of that. And we have other communities where, if you do some construction near a corner where a pedestrian crossing is, it triggers a requirement to upgrade the crossing to ADA compliance, the yellow plastic dot grids that go down and all the new concrete work. And each of those can cost tens of thousands of dollars to do 4 corners of an intersection. And so communities have long kind of used utilities as a bit of a piggy bank to get these sorts of projects done or to extract rents, so to speak. That discourages deployment. And so when carriers have a choice, do I deploy in city A or city B, you're going to build in the city where the permits and fees and cooperation is reasonable. And, where when you approach that city, they say, great, you want to deploy, how can we partner with you? And, gosh, we have some conduit across that bridge. Would you like to deploy fiber in that and split the fiber with us? There's some real win-win partnership opportunities. And we've done 2 great public-private partnerships. One was with a city that in 1999 got frustrated with their monopoly cable franchise, and as a result passed a dig once ordinance that required developers of all new subdivisions to put in conduit. So you're building a subdivision, you have an obligation to put in roads and fire hydrants and water systems and street trees and sidewalks. These are expensive things. The city added to that, you also need to put in a 2-inch conduit down the street along with all the other telecom and power and gas lines, and a pipe to the side of each house, a conduit to the they also set standards. They wanted a power outlet at the side of the house, GFCI outlet in a sheltered area, and Ethernet cabling in the homes. So really foresightful standards that the city put into place, 2 decades ago. And those conduits then are owned by the city, and we did a partnership to share and use those conduits, and that brought a more cost-effective fiber to the home solution to all those homes. We also did a public-private partnership with a rail system, and railroads, modern railroads need positive train control, signaling systems that bring down the guard gates that are synchronized with the trains and have bidirectional communications with the trains. You also need, Wi-Fi at all the platforms. You need ticketing systems. You need security cameras. And so all these things need fiber optics, but railroad systems aren't expert at deploying or maintaining fiber optic systems, but they have useful right-of-way that runs from city to city to city. And so we did a public-private partnership with a rail system that was a huge win for them in savings in deployment and maintenance costs, and a huge win for us in access to right-of-way. So I would encourage, communities to think about, if you want to see fiber get built, how do you facilitate that? And as we talk about the bandwidth needs of a society locked down due to a global pandemic, you only need to bring all the tools in the toolbox to bear.
Well, you see a comment there from Lisa Shaw that agrees with your municipality points. There's another good question here I want to get in the mix here, also by Lisa here about, that's a separate point. This is going to form discussions around comprehensive plans, zoning, site plans from here on out. Well, that's great. That's exactly where we want to talk about. But we don't want to forget about our current situation. And let me put a question to Tyler here. Justin Martin asks, do you think that there will be a long-term move to the work at home, learn from home environment? Is it foreseeable that after COVID-19, people may continue the at-home lifestyle? Effects of this. We'll start with Tyler, but Roger and Dane as well. What are your thoughts on this question here from Justin?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like at the moment, we're all going through this great experiment, right? Everyone's sort of shifting their lifestyle in ways that are pretty major for a lot of folks, and I think a lot of people are learning that their job can in fact be done from home, and it's difficult to say after we sort of get past this current situation how things will shift, whether this will be more of a permanent change. I mean, I think it's reasonable to assume that for some it may be. Ideally, obviously, schools and things of that nature can return to normal operation sooner than later. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like the effects something like this might have, I mean, I think for one, for the duration of this, like I said, I don't think we've really seen the peak. I think we'll continue to see businesses close as if the virus continues to spread. We'll see businesses close more and more. We'll see schools close, and we'll have to deal with sort of the immediate effects of that. And from everything I've heard from Roger and Dane and everything I've seen, it looks like we're up to the task. I'm optimistic we can deal with that. But yeah, I don't think that there'll be any sweeping changes that need to be made if all of a sudden we have a segment of the market that's more amenable to working from home or more able to do so. I think that there probably isn't cause for alarm just yet, but I'd love to hear the other panelist's perspective, but it doesn't strike me as, you know, being particularly dangerous.
But before we turn to Roger and Dane, let me just ask one more question, Tyler, which is that, well, these other two panelists, Roger and Dane, they've got fiber networks, right? And so they're up to the task. But I'm certainly not happy today with my network and the performance I'm getting on upstream. Could you speak about whether you at Broadband Now segregate out types of technologies, fiber, cable, DSL, fixed wireless, mobile wireless, and whether you look at those on a technology type basis in different regions of the country?
Certainly. Well, we do a lot of that as part of our regular research and reporting, absolutely. In terms of measuring the effects of this current pandemic, that is not something we've been able to do yet, but it is something that we are actively looking into, and this panel has even spurred it on even more. It's clear that this is something that's important and that we need to sort of delineate for, because I mean, we've brought up a lot of excellent points here, but it does seem as though, if we're just looking at the national data, as a whole, we are sort of mixing in technologies that may provide a skewed perspective on what's really happening, especially in some of the more suburban and rural areas. We may be seeing that, the fiber providers and all over the country are doing just fine, but there may be, people relying on older technologies that are really, really suffering right now. And so far, our analysis of the top 10 cities in the US may not bear that. And so, yes, that is something that we are absolutely looking to break down further. It's a sort of a difficult task using just measurement labs data, but it's something that we are actively exploring. And like I said, I really hope to have something like that in the next couple of weeks, but hopefully next week.
Roger, let's go to you to react to this point.
Yeah, so in Utah, the top two political issues are we've got air quality and then transportation. And we've been making the case for a long time that, we could use technology to help with these things. And obviously we hate the circumstances. We hate the circumstances that are forcing people to use these technologies to learn remotely, to work remotely, to telehealth remotely, but now that we're kind of forced into this under, emergency circumstances, it's a great educational opportunity for everyone to learn how to use these technologies. So the positive effect, obviously we hate what's happening, but the positive impact has been that we don't have traffic. During this situation, it's pulled everybody off the roads, and that's also decreased air quality problems or pollution significantly, more than any policy we've ever pushed in Utah, trying to address those two issues. It just came as a side effect of this, the quarantine, obviously. And of course, when the quarantine is lifted, we'll have more people out on the roads, but we'll probably gain significant, benefit out of the education of using technology so that we continue to use this and help with transportation air quality issues as a result. So I'm hoping this does help us with a step forward in that perspective. But, we want to get out of our houses at some point.
Go out of your house. Just don't go talk with the others at the street corner. So, no, it is unusual. There's been a lot of creative adaptation. For example, in our neighborhood in Orem, Utah, we've actually organized a kind of a virtual game where people would put shamrocks on their doors, a number on their door, and then shamrocks in their yard, so people could walk around and count how many shamrocks there were. So it's just kind of a way to have some kind of interaction, even when you can't have what we normally think of as interaction. So, Dane, what are your thoughts on how this?
Quick example. Just before we switch over, I wanted to bring up an example. Yeah. Just last night, I had to present at a Brigham City City Council meeting, and the plan and the way I've had to do this in the past was always having to drive to that city council meeting, and it's several hours away. It's quite the drive. It takes up a huge part of my day. Obviously, I'm guzzling gas on that drive, but this situation has driven them to see if they could actually conduct their city council meetings remotely. So we did it last night, and we used Zoom and a conferencing system there in their room, and they had city council members join remotely. And had we not had this situation, I don't think they would ever pushed to migrate and improve the abilities of their city council meetings to do this. So Yeah, bad circumstances, but what a cool example. I was able to stay at home and participate in a city council meeting, and it went very, very well.
Yeah, you're not the only one who's not there in person, right? Which is the way it often is with telecommuting in, right?
Yep.
Dane, what are your thoughts on, is this the new normal, work from home? What does that mean for these future driven networks?
I mean, I share Roger's optimism. This is a very difficult circumstance, and we have individuals and families throughout our country and around the world struggling with their health right now. We have folks in a lot of fear. My family, we've been in our home for 9 days in a row now, and it's getting a little bit weird. It's you go a little bit stir crazy. On the other side, I've also seen some really great things happening in our community. People supporting local businesses, buying gift cards and buying local products, and making sure they order takeout, trying to support the restaurants. The other side is we're all being forced to try out technology that has been available, but either we didn't need it, or it wasn't well adopted, and so I think the public and businesses and city councils, for example, are all being forced to adapt to this condition and just try things and see what works, with mixed results. And at the end of that, I think we're all going to have a better understanding of the pros and cons, what's possible with the technology, and hopefully we end up taking away from that the best parts of it. And for example, some employers have always been against remote work, and some employees could be very productive working remotely, saving a couple hours of driving every day. And can we find a bridge between those things where employers go, well, actually we were forced to do this, and we found that this category of employees was actually as productive or more so, and how can we give them more freedom? Others may say, gosh, I need to get out of the house. The office is part of my lifestyle, part of my retreat, and it's what I want and like. So I'm always an optimist. We talk about how can this justify deployment and make clear that America needs better broadband. We need more fiber deployment. That's one category for me. The other is, what can people learn and how can people help each other? The other thing that I'm seeing is a lot of folks, we have seen record orders. I'd be interested, Roger, if you're seeing the same, but over the last week, we've seen more new service orders in a week than we've seen in any other time, absent some sort of major promotional push. And the sense I get is that people have been procrastinating the move off of older technologies, fundamentally cutting the cord, getting rid of the big cable bundle. And now they're saying, well, gee, we're all home and we need the best broadband. I've been meaning to do that for a long time. I've been hearing about how great fiber is. Now I'm going to make that switch. And that, it's obviously a self-serving comment, but fundamentally, I think that technology in the home and being well connected is transformative, and getting rid of the big pay TV bundle. The average American household spends about $250 a month on this big bundle. And today, TV is just an app. You can subscribe to a few different services that you like. You can turn them off when you don't need them anymore. And understanding that technology and the difference between the old way of a cable box and an annual contract, and instead you need a streaming solution, a Roku or an Apple TV, and then you subscribe to a variety of services, and it's just like apps on your phone. And I think people are beginning to get that, and so it's good to see those sorts of things as well.
Yeah, we only have 2 minutes left, and Barbara Walters has come in with a question about any talk around how we can support students that don't have access to the internet at home, Wi-Fi hotspots. Roger, I'm wondering if you could just speak briefly about the extent of the Wi-Fi networks that you have, again, mostly for public access points, but could you speak to, have you thought about that at all in this, doing anything differently in regards to Wi-Fi?
Yeah, I mean, we don't provide the Wi-Fi in the homes. We provide fiber, and then the user will use whatever Wi-Fi router they want to use. But we do provide connectivity and support for cities and their Wi-Fi needs. So pretty much all of the parks, all of the city buildings, all the city facilities throughout our cities have Wi-Fi hotspots. they're always open and they're always free. So we haven't really changed anything there. We always want that to be a resource. But how we could go above and beyond, I would just say it might be a good idea. Most routers support that little guest Wi-Fi, login where it doesn't expose your internal network to the guest, but still allows someone to piggyback on your network.
Okay, good point.
With a lot of the new routers, it's just a click and a save on your router configuration, and now you can help out neighbors who may be able to get to your signal. If we made open public networks across our cities, I think that would make a pretty big impact.
Great point. Great point.
There's some work being done. The FCC is discussing the idea of using universal service fund support. So, under the No Child Left Behind E-rate program, schools receive subsidies they use to buy connectivity. And the idea is to allow some of those subsidies to be applied to Wi-Fi hotspot lending programs. Some libraries are doing this where they'll have a catalog they'll have a batch of Wi-Fi hotspots. Barbara, it doesn't solve the problem where there's no good cellular coverage, but it might solve the problem where you have a home, there is good cellular coverage, and either there isn't good wireline broadband or they can't afford it. And can the school provide a hotspot or the library provide a hotspot? I think that's an important component. Now, we're not a wireless carrier, so I don't have a lot of expertise in that area, but I think it's a good solution.
Well, we have run out of time, and I want to be punctual on and off the hour. Thank you all for joining us, Tyler and Roger and Dane, and thank you to our audience for listening in. Our next event, Broadband Breakfast Live Online, will take place on Monday at 12 noon Eastern Time, and we plan to be talking about free and low-cost internet plans during the coronavirus crisis. So hopefully there'll be a lot more information on the question that Barbara just asked. Thank you again. Follow us and follow this stream, which will be live immediately at broadbandbreakfast.com, and join us next Monday at 12 Eastern Time. Thank you.